You're about to watch a great interview on TYT Interviews. If you want to watch them live, members are the only ones who get to do that. tytnetwork.com/join. Become a member, enjoy the interviews as they happen.
This is Reporting In.
Hey, and welcome to Reporting In. I'm your host, Malcolm Fleschner. This is the TYT members only show where we talk to journalists in the field, talk to them about the stories they're covering, and maybe a little bit about the stories behind the stories they're covering, if that makes any sense. Today on the show, I'm talking to Kerry-Anne Mendoza, who is the editor-in-chief of the Canary, which is a British online publication. And I'm excited to talk to her because she's going to give us her perspective and a perspective of the British journalist on the Windrush Scandal, which you may have heard about, but maybe don't know a whole lot about. So first of all, I'd like to thank Kerry-Anne for coming on the show. Kerry, you're up at it's like midnight where you are. I appreciate your staying up to do this with me.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be on. I love the show and watch it regularly, so thanks for having me.
Terrific. And you're coming to us from Bristol. Where is Bristol in England specifically? So
Bristol is southwest of London by about 100 or so miles. So we're on the coast on the southwest of England.
All right, lovely, lovely. And do you find it's an advantage being out of, I mean, I'm already going off track here, but do you find it's an advantage not being in London, being away from the center of power to be able to get a broader perspective on what's going on in the country?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a decision we took deliberately. We actually operate an online virtual newsroom. So our whole editorial process is managed in a newsroom that we can access online. So our journalists, rather than being in a sort of big office based in London, are writing in their communities all across the country and around the world, because we've got an international section too.
Right, and the fact that that probably saves you some money has nothing to do with it, I'm sure.
It does help. It means we can actually pay the writers rather than paying, private landlords massive rent, which is always a help.
Right. Well, I want to find out about the business model for the Canary, but firstly, why don't you give us a little bit of background on you? I know that you've actually been on the Young Turks before. You did an interview with Cenk a couple of years ago, back when you were in Gaza, I think, for a previous Gaza crisis, not as to be not
I was indeed, yeah, I was over reporting for a few weeks during Operation Protective Edge, and Cenk was kind enough to have me on just literally I think it was the day or two after I got home, so I was able to give a fairly fresh account of what had been happening there.
Right, I remember when you said you're emailing, you apologized for your emails being infrequent or not as responsive as you might be because you had bombing. There was intermittent bombing, and that
it was insane. It was insane.
I'm sure, but in terms of an excuse for not returning emails promptly, that's really right up there, one of the best.
It's one of my better ones.
Okay, so what is your background? How did you come to choose to journalism as a profession, and why would you think this is a good idea? Not because you wanted to make any money or any friends, obviously. That can't be it.
Absolutely. I think, like most, modern kind of journalists, we've almost got more in common with old-fashioned kind of hacks, in that we kind of come in on issues. And my issue primarily began with Israel and Palestine. I've made my first trip there in 2002, so it's been a long-term commitment for me. And by 2014, I set up a blog. I was covering kind of politics, economics, current affairs, and then Gaza exploded almost literally in 2014. So I crowdfunded with my blog readers. The Scriptonite Daily blog at that point had about 250,000 readers a month, so not massive, but pretty big for an indie blog. And they crowdfunded for me to go and be their personal journalist on the ground, and I was able to report back every evening. I did a live stream and writing daily dispatches, and actually created a film that I then took touring around the country when I came home. So it was really useful. I think that was where I really committed to journalism in earnest at that point, is actually getting yourself on the front line and reporting originally, rather than just kind of churning out other versions of things that are being written about in the mainstream media.
Right, and so did that lead you to the Canary and founding the Canary? I assume it's called the Canary because of the canary in the coal mine, being the harbinger or the bellwether of news that is, well, not good news, but
it certainly is. In fact, it was inspired by your fabulous Jesse Jackson, who came to speak at Occupy in 2011 when I was there, and he said at the time, you occupiers are the canary in the coal mine. and we should be listening to you about the dangers of our economic system rather than kind of shutting you out. And it just resonated with me, that idea that to me is the basic role of the media, is to warn of the dangers, is to look at trends, look at things that are happening, alert people to issues that they care about and they want to get involved in, and empower them to get involved proactively in those issues so that, we can change the world for the better. Call me an idealist. So the idea of the Canary was bringing together, people I knew who were brilliant editors, people I knew who were brilliant individual writers, and we were all working disparately. And it was, what if we actually brought ourselves together and tried something new on the left? In the UK, I think there was already a healthy new media ecosystem happening in the United States and in Scotland here in Britain. But England was still kind of patchy, and a lot of the independent media, particularly on the left, is very academic. And that's fantastic. It absolutely has a role to play in discussing ideas, generating ideas and policies that can come out of the left wing. But what it's really bad at is actually engaging the kinds of people that we need to engage to actually create a kind of critical mass of progressive opinion. And you only really do that by going out there, writing in an accessible way so that people don't feel like the stuff that you're writing is, exclusive, is somehow above them or beyond their capability to understand. And so that's our whole style, is almost as if it were a left-wing tabloid. So we like to call it kind of, we get kind of pilloried from the centre, kind of our equivalent of the establishment Democrats. We have those.
Right.
They're called centrists here. So they're Labour Party people, but who are very pro neoliberalism and
the Tony Blair wing of the Labour Party.
Exactly, and kind of we pretty much predicted that they would go nuts once they realised that we were going, and they duly did. And they kind of like to call us the left-wing Daily Mail, which is a far right, I would call it, far right tabloid in the UK, but it's also the most read website in the UK. But it's not the BBC, and it's kind of a backhanded compliment, really, because what we wanted to do was generate the reach of the Daily Mail, to be communicating progressive ideas at the frequency and the reach of the likes of the Daily Mail and the Sun on the right. And we've been fairly successful in doing that. When we came round to the general election last year, we were reaching about 15 million people in the run-up to that general election, which was just a few weeks, which is a massive, influence to have at a very, very critical time. And we've continued since, to the chagrin of our centrist politicians and journalists.
Well, I mean, I think that's an issue that confronts anybody who's trying to get your message out. With there's so much noise, and even in the United States, the traditional left-wing media has, it's sort of hidebound, and it definitely has a foot in an earlier generation. And new media like the Young Turks, for example, is brasher, and it's a little more in your face and a little more provocative. And I think that's, there are some who clutch their pearls about that, but what they can't argue against is the success, and that in the new media you need to have a different approach to reaching an audience, and you can be pure, and we're going to. You can't, if you focus on all the things that made you successful potentially in the past, that's not necessarily going to work in today's media. So I encourage people to check out the Canary and see what they think, and as a means not only of getting in touch with what's going on from a left perspective on news in the UK, but also you're covering international stories as well, as you point out.
Well, the good news is we're actually going to be launching in the US within the next 18 months. So your readers will, your viewers will have the chance to actually read US news written by US journalists in the United States in the not too distant future.
Oh, so we're going to be competing with you to hire journalists now, are we? Oh, I see. Okay, all right. It's on, Canary.
We can be friends.
Although, hey, I'm open to offers. This is I'm not here. I don't even have a contract. So, but anyway, okay. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, and one of the things I wanted to do with this show in general, when we talk to journalists who aren't within the TYT fold, is specifically talk to international journalists about some of the stories that are important in their necks of the woods, and why they're important. And because in the United States, and the Young Turks is guilty of this as well, that the coverage of international stories is piss poor. And it's not like we've never covered Brexit, and you cover Russia, and and that sort of stuff, and Israel to a degree. But international stories are not our strong suit, and part of the problem is that with the American public is that we are hopelessly, woefully ignorant about what goes on in the rest of the world. And I've been following the so-called Windrush Scandal to a degree, to the best of my ability, considering my other responsibilities. And I wanted to share with our audience what it is, why it's important, and what it says about the current situation in the UK regarding immigration, because it's coming to a head now, and it informs. Obviously, it's been a huge driving force with Brexit, and I'd like to sort of hear from you the attitudes about the immigrants in the UK or in England or in Great Britain specifically, compared to here in the United States. And I think there are similarities and there are certain differences. So can you give us just a primer quickly on the background on the Windrush Scandal, what it is, and why it matters?
Absolutely. So the reason it's called the Windrush Scandal is because we have a Windrush generation of immigrants in the UK. So those are people that were living in former countries of the Commonwealth, which is the really cute name for empire.
Right.
So these are countries colonized, taken over by Britain. And after World War II, because obviously we had a lot of death, a lot of destruction, we needed to rebuild the country, and we had a load of job shortages that we were critical, from driving buses through to working in our health service, which was just setting up at that point, the National Health Service. And this invitation, this call went out to the Commonwealth countries to say, come to the motherland, help the motherland rebuild. And incidentally, I'm a product of that call. So I'm the granddaughter of a Windrush generation immigrant. My grandfather came to Britain from the Caribbean. And the reason they're called Windrush is because of the ship they came over on, called the Empire Windrush.
I believe it's just last month was the 70th anniversary of the Windrush's arrival in England, right?
It was, and how you'll hear it now is the Windrush generation are honoured and respected, and they're the good kind of immigrant, and all of that stuff, and all of that's wonderful, and I'm proud of what my granddad did and the rest of the Windrush generation, but that wasn't how they were welcomed at the time. My granddad, when he came to Bristol, the Bristol bus drivers went on strike to prevent black people getting jobs on the buses. Mm-hmm. So, and he was also threatened with, their home was threatened with a firebomb attack because my granddad married a white woman. So it was not pleasant at the time, but over time, this came to be a very respected community.
Is this acknowledged now that at the time, because I'm sure the impression is that the call went out, we need your help, rebuild Britain, come help us, and they came to our shores, they were welcomed, and we gave them jobs and so on and so forth. But you're saying that's not the reality. Is that the perception, or does everybody acknowledge that it was horrible for them at the time as well?
Yeah, there's some really fantastic literature on it. There's a great book called Small Island, which was recently made into a movie, which was very successful, and that was really about what that Windrush generation faced when they came here. They were kind of really excited. These were, people who were excited to be a part of the motherland and arrived, and many of them got treated fairly poorly by their communities, but by no means all. And as I say, over time, as happens in Britain, basically each decade we pick the worst immigrants, and they're always the newest. So now we love the Windrush generation because they're settled, but we hate Muslims and we hate the Polish. So it's very contemporary, the issue of immigration in the UK. It's kind of, if you've been here 10 years, we'll get over it now. So what happened in 1971 was there was an Immigration Act and a decree that said this whole Windrush generation, so everyone that arrived from sort of 45 to 48, right through to 71, had indefinite leave to remain, which means you're a citizen, that's it, done deal, you're not going to get kicked out. Fantastic. And many of these people brought their children with them. So the children didn't have documentation, they just came over on their parents' passport. Many of them were babes in arms and toddlers. Time goes by, we get the wonderful coalition government in 2010. This is the Conservative and Liberal Democrats. And Theresa May, who is currently our Prime Minister, was made Home Secretary. Now, our Home Secretary is a massive brief. It's everything from the police service and national security through to border control and immigration and many, many other things. And she said in a landmark, fairly racist speech that she was committed to creating a hostile environment for immigrants to Britain. And she meant it, and she was true to her word. We had vans going around London, but they're called now the racist go home vans, that literally said, if you're here illegally, go home. If and trying to get neighbours to dob in illegal immigrants. And then it moved a step further, and in about 2012 to 2015, they started pushing through various immigration acts, which meant that now doctors, renters, and landlords, and all sorts, basically any way you were going to interact, if you tried to access the NHS or the welfare state, then they would now be acting as immigration officials. They would need to see documentation to prove your citizenship if you're going to get access to any of these things, which we didn't have hitherto. Now, at the time, the left of the Labour Party absolutely opposed these acts. They saw the dangers. They said, look, this is really bad. This is going to have some negative impacts. People are going to be denied healthcare potentially. People are going to lose their jobs. People are going to lose their homes. This is a really, really bad idea. But the centre of the Labour Party at the time, which was the vast majority, and the leader, Ed Miliband, were trying to convince the electorate that they were really tough on immigration. They were going to be as tough on immigration as the Conservative Party are. And so they backed the bill. They actually backed it, voted for it, or abstained. It's just a shocking moment for a supposedly left-wing progressive party. And then cases started reaching MPs saying that Windrush generation, so these are not only Windrush generation immigrants, but their children, people who've lived here since they were babes, little babies.
And who often did not have any documentation, as you pointed out.
Well, quite. Were being threatened with deportation. Not only did they, so the Home Office says to them, you have to prove your immigration status. They say, we can't prove our immigration status because you never supplied us any paperwork. You just issued a decree. So they say, well, you must have documentation that proved you were on the Windrush. And we then find out that in 2010, so while the coalition government was in power, they destroyed the Windrush generation's registration cards. They took that action. They decided to destroy the single piece of paperwork and documentation that would have proved these people's migration status.
Okay, so they're saying, look, we're gonna deport you, or we're gonna make your life so miserable that you're going to self-deport if you can't prove documentation that you belong here. Meanwhile, they're destroying that very documentation. And who was behind that move? I mean, who was responsible for that?
It would have been Theresa May. She was the Home Secretary at the time they were destroyed. What's even more frustrating about this process, Malcolm, is all the denials at every stage. The denial that it was happening at all, then it was proven that it was happening. Then the denial that any targets had been set on deporting these immigrants, and then we find out actually there were targets. So, despite the fact that Theresa May was responsible for all of this, all of this, she throws her new Home Secretary and closest political ally, Amber Rudd, the then Home Secretary, this current Home Secretary, throws her under the bus. Amber Rudd resigns.
But Amber Rudd was also complicit in this, and she participated in the lies and the misrepresentation about it.
There's no denial about Amber Rudd's complicity in this while in role as Home Secretary, but all of the decisions taken, effectively Amber Rudd was doing everything that Theresa May had planned and set up. So not only as Prime Minister, but as the Home Secretary, when she devised this act, she destroyed the cards. She's been responsible for all of this. Then, to give you some idea of the people, I just made some notes earlier on of some characters. You had a woman called Sonia Williams, who literally went to renew her driving license and was told, that's it, you can't have another one because we believe you're an illegal immigrant. She then lost her job and was asked to leave the country. We've got Michael Braithwaite. He's been in the country since he was 9 years old. He lost his job. He'd been serving 15 years as a special needs teaching assistant, sacked because he doesn't have the right to work here because he's now classed as an illegal immigrant. There's a high-profile case of a guy called Stanley Marshall who discovered he had terminal cancer, went to get treatment for it, and then wasn't allowed because they considered him an illegal immigrant and therefore no longer able to accept services from the National Health Service, which is just an absolute disgrace. And then through all of this, they were saying, okay, this is all bad, but we can just stop all this now. Now we know it's happening. We're going to cancel it. We're not going to do anything more to these people. But MPs in the areas which, many of these people live are still getting the cases. And we just found out yesterday that actually 991 flights, deportation flights, were conducted between 2015 and 2017 of Windrush generation immigrants and their children.
Right, so that, that's not the kind of thing you can just say, okay, our bad, whoops. This is 1,000 people who have been deported unfairly and unjustly, and now they are spread around the globe wherever. I mean, I don't even know where do you deport them to? I mean, if they're your grandfather came from Jamaica.
Yeah, exactly. If your granddad or your granddad or your father came from Jamaica, they flew you off to Jamaica. Never mind, many of these people have never even been to the country. They're right. British. They've lived their entire life.
It sounds similar to what the Dreamers here in the United States. Although even it goes back generations. People have been here for their family for generations. It's shocking. We only have a couple of minutes left. I'm sorry. I would love to talk to you about this at length. I have like a million questions that I can't get to. But but first I want to find out, is there widespread condemnation? Is this universally looked upon as a stain on the government and what the government has done? Or are there some factions, the right, who think, no, they're getting what they deserve. They shouldn't be here in the first place. We're happy to be rid of them.
To be honest, it kicked off so badly because it targeting specifically the Windrush generation, which are now held in fairly high esteem in the country. There was pretty much universal condemnation about this, apart from on the very fringes of the far right. And to be honest, even people like Nigel Farage, were going, this is awful, what's happening. But interestingly, it's like so much with what happens right now. There's outrage about the end result, the fact that people were deported, that they lost their jobs, that they lost access to healthcare, that people were literally in immigration detention centres, they were jailed. There's outrage about that. But there's also then this sort of, and this is coming not just from the centre-right, but also from the centre-left, the centrists in the Labour Party, who supported the bill, say, well, there's nothing technically wrong with the act. There's nothing technically wrong with the legislation or with the idea that we should be kicking people out of the country. We just, we want to get the right ones. We don't want to, we don't want to hurt anybody.
We got some of the good ones got swept up with all the bad ones.
Exactly, and so the likelihood of the act itself being repealed is minimal at this stage, not without a Corbyn-led Labour government. And most of the journalists are focusing again on single issue stories rather than actually panning back and saying, maybe this is symptomatic of a wider issue. Right.
Maybe we should think about encompass our perspective on this to all immigrants, even if they're the hated Poles or Muslims, and not just the beloved Jamaicans and West Indians. And okay, we're almost out of time. But just quickly, do you think there's going to be any long-term damage to Theresa May's political career? Is this the kind of thing that could potentially bring her down?
Theresa May is a dead woman walking. The only reason that she's still in power as Prime Minister right now is because the Conservative Party know it's a poison chalice. They can't work out what's going on. They don't know why they've lost support, and they don't have an obvious charismatic candidate to come behind her. So I think pretty much the only reason she's still in place is because nobody wants the burden right now to take over the Conservative Party at its least popular moment. But the knives are starting to sharpen. There's talk about other leadership candidates, and there's even rumours starting to emanate from Westminster that we might get another snap general election, which would just be bizarre. It's going to be our second election in a year or something. So we're all kind of waiting to see what's going on while trying really to get as many progressive messages across as possible about it's great to be outraged about what's happening, but we also need to be putting forward decent ideas for how we can change and enlisting support in that. And I think almost stepping back in time, the idea that we would ever nostalgize about our approach to immigration in the past is a joke.
Yeah.
It's a really sad joke. I know you guys must be feeling like this in the United States.
Yeah, we do it too. Why can't the good immigrants versus the bad ones today who don't want to assimilate, like as opposed to the ones in the past who were so eager to assimilate, except that they actually frequently never learned to speak English. And there's plenty to be discussed in that, but we don't have time today, unfortunately. Kerry-Anne, thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with us. I really appreciate you giving us this insight. I hope you will, maybe you'll come back in the future, become our UK correspondent for future episodes, because I love the insight and the perspective you give us. So thanks so much for talking to me.
That's great, Malcolm. You take care.
All right, you too, and you get some sleep. And for those of you at home, thank you so much for watching, reporting in. It's a members-only show. Your support makes this show happen. Without you, it doesn't happen. I don't get to sit here and talk to you and talk to Kerry and talk about important stories like the Windrush Scandal going on. Now you know about it. I know more about it, and I feel better about it myself for being informed. Thank you so much for tuning in. And next week, I think, it's going to be another great episode. I promise. I won't tell you who, but thanks for watching this one. I appreciate it. Next time.
If you liked this interview and you're at the end, so apparently you liked it a little bit, thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. You can watch them live as they happen if you're a member. Only members get that. Go to tytnetwork.com/join, and you get not only interviews live, you get the Young Turks live, you get Aggressive Progressive live, Old School, and all of it commercial free. Come join us right now. tytnetwork.com/join.